So today, when Statistics South Africa releases the third quarter labour force survey results, the numbers are expected to reflect the impact of the July civil unrest on the rate of unemployment in our country. Youth unemployment in particular has hit a new record high of 64.4%. Experts are warning that this is a ticking time bomb that threatens to destabilise both the social and political realms of our country. With more people relying now on social grounds, what are the policy tools at our disposal to alleviate youth unemployment? Let's unpack the story for you. Bryden Morton is the Executive Director of HR consultancy 21st Century. He joins us now for a preview of those numbers. Bryden, it's great to have you with us on the show. A very good morning to you so early on a Tuesday. I mean, the unemployment rate in the last release of these survey results hitting a record high. What are some of the factors that you reckon are going to play into today's numbers?
Firstly, good morning to you and good morning to the viewers. It's a bit of a difficult one to predict exactly what the unemployment rate will be because of the factors that come into that number. So if you have a situation where the July unrest led to a large number of discouraged workers, well, in effect, they exit from the labour force in terms of the strict definition. So if we have a situation where more people became discouraged and hence removed themselves from the labour force, it's quite likely that you could even see an anomaly such as a decrease in the unemployment rate because of the way it's calculated. If I rather focus on something which is a bit more of a tangible figure, such as the number of employed people, rather than expressing it as a ratio of the labour force, which can change for various reasons, the unfortunate news is if you look at Q1 2008 and you look at Q2 2021, South Africa's only added 500,000 jobs in 14 years, which represents 3.5% in terms of the increase in employment. However, the startling numbers that's against is that over the same period of time, the population of working age has increased by 26% and the labour force has increased by 21%. So you can see that at the moment there's a significant gap between the ability for the economy to absorb new entrants relative to the amount of people who would like to enter the economy.
So there are a lot of numbers that actually play into the figures that we get insofar as unemployment numbers are concerned. And you've just alluded to some of that now. The numbers insofar as the number of people in our labour force, that has jumped quite markedly by 530,000 in the last year, as I understand it, Bryden. You'll correct us if we're wrong. But that doesn't add up when we think about 500, did you say 500,000 additional jobs added in 14 years?
Correct. It's from around 18.3 million to around 18.8 million currently.
So we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough just to create jobs as a start, and then also, as you say, to absorb the newcomers into the labour force.
Correct. And unfortunately, the newcomer is the person who bears the brunt as we get further into a cycle such as what we're seeing. So what I mean by that is, let's use myself as an example. Let's say I had just completed varsity and I had just entered the workforce. In an economy where unemployment is fairly low, I would expect that entry-level opportunities would be available to me because those more advanced have progressed in their career to another point in their career path. However, unfortunately, at the moment, because we've got such a high unemployment rate, what happens is you have a number of people who are actually more skilled who can't find work. So they are willing to actually accept work at a lower level than what they are used to just to put food on the table. And unfortunately, that would crowd out that entry-level person. A bigger and a more scary knock-on effect is let's assume that everybody starts working 5 to 10 years later. When I say working, I mean full-time. They are continually employed. Well, then everyone's pension funds only start 5-10 years later, and we know that you better start early to take advantage of the compounding effect. So unless we can do something to get people to be able to look after themselves post their career, the government's going to end up with a much larger burden in terms of what they need to provide because it'll be providing more to more people.
I mean, it is a ticking time bomb. It's been described as such, and not just because, as we say, and this is the biggest issue with unemployment numbers, that the vast majority of those impacted are the youth. But that knock-on effect that you're talking about means that we've got problems at both ends. The youth entering the market and people who are leaving the job market because they're of age.
Correct. And unfortunately, if we have increased numbers of unemployed people and we have people starting later, you can see that we have fewer people who will be financially ready for retirement. And we already live in an economy where, unfortunately, the percentage of people who are financially ready for retirement is far lower than what we would like to see.
How do the numbers feed in? Because, insofar as permanent jobs are concerned, that's one thing that feeds into the unemployment and employment numbers. What about job opportunities? How does that impact on the scenario that you've just painted for us?
So job opportunities obviously are key to increasing the supply of jobs. Unfortunately, one issue that we sit with in South Africa is if you look at I think it's the Global Development Index, I stand to correction there, but one of the elements on it is the labor rigidity laws and where they rank. And unfortunately, mistrust between employers and employees in South Africa is one of the largest in the group that is being measured within that index. And what this means is because labor law is so rigid in South Africa in terms of you have to go through a lot between employing someone, realizing it's unsustainable, and being able to release them. Because of that, employers tend to wait for a large amount of information to make them feel confident that whomever they hire will be sustainable for a long period into the future before they will actually make that hire. So maybe something to make it a little bit easier to be able to bring on staff, whatever that may be, definitely needs to go and be discussed between business and labor. But something just to make it a little bit easier so that employers aren't as scared to offer an opportunity. I mean, that would probably be where our start is. Make it easier for opportunities to be created.
Yeah, absolutely. So legacy and policy issues, that's one thing. Some of the other issues that no doubt will be feeding into these unemployment numbers, and perhaps the ones in the fourth quarter as well, are things that are unfolding now insofar as the pandemic is concerned, and perhaps also the July civil unrest. Do you see the unrest that we saw in parts of Gauteng and KZN feeding into these third quarter numbers?
It depends on the nature of the loss of the job. So at that period of time, in that moment, jobs were lost. It just depends how much was rebuilt and how much was able to be replaced between then and now. But unfortunately, I think in the short term at least, we'll see an impact there. What that impact may be, and unfortunately I cannot say, but I am expecting to see that in the short run we have not been able to recover, and hopefully in 2 quarters, 3 quarters from now we may get those back. Yeah,
difficult to quantify, I suppose, at this stage, as perhaps is the issue when it comes to mandatory vaccine policies. We are headed in that direction. There's a lot of analysis that says legally we do have the framework to get mandatory vaccines to become a reality in South Africa. Do you see people leaving the labor force if their employer does start with mandatory vaccines? We've seen it already with the likes of several universities, Discovery as well.
I think it's a symptom of where you live. So if you lived in a place where, let's say, 5% was the unemployment rate, you had strong social security, then I think that choice is a lot easier for somebody to make. If they feel strongly enough that they feel that it is their right not to be vaccinated, then that person has a lot more leverage because of what is afforded to them in terms of A, the state's ability to support them during the period of time that they aren't working, and B, when they decide to re-enter the labor force, the unemployment rate is quite low. Unfortunately, that is not the case in South Africa, where we have incredibly high unemployment rate and incredibly low social security relative to other economies in the world. And because of that, I think that people are going to sort of have their hand forced rather than have a decision around whether or not they choose to be employed. I think that the alternative to not being employed is far more drastic. So anybody who has dependents will, I would like to believe, make the responsible decision and not give up their employment.
I mean, Bryden, as we wind up our conversation, there are so many factors feeding into the scenario that we find ourselves in, and that will no doubt feed into the numbers that we see today. At midnight tonight, we're also faced with another petrol price increase, 20 Rand a litre, far-ranging effects there as well for a particular segment and the majority of our country.
Correct. I actually wrote an article with my CEO, Chris Blair, last month, and in there we actually looked at the first three expenditure deciles. So in other words, the three deciles, so the 30% of the population in South Africa that spends the least at least, has the highest instance of inflation that they are facing. Actually, the first and the second decile are at a level which is above that of the upper limit of the Reserve Bank's inflation target. So again, we've got an issue where we've spoken about the marginalized youth in terms of finding employment, but now we've got a situation where we've got those that are most marginalized again feeling the brunt of the inflation rate.
Absolutely. Bryden Morton, thanks very much indeed for helping us understand the position we find ourselves in, specifically as we wait for those Stats SA numbers to be released today. He is the Executive Director of HR Consultancy at 21st Century.